At 2:11 a.m., the most powerful floor in Tower Crown was supposed to be empty. No staff. No lights. No mistakes. But inside the CEO's glass office, a cleaning lady stood frozen in front of his private system, red numbers flashing like alarms, her hands hovering over data that could erase $500 million before morning. She wasn't meant to be there. She wasn't meant to understand any of it. And if anyone discovered what she was fixing, she wouldn't just lose her job. She could bring down the entire company. Before we continue like this story, subscribe to my channel and comment the city you're watching from, because what happens next changes everything. At exactly 2:11 a.m., the executive floor of Tower Crown was not supposed to exist. Not really. After midnight, the building became a hollow shell, lights off, elevators silent, hallways polished into reflective emptiness. The kind of quiet that made even your own footsteps feel intrusive. The kind of place that reminded you very clearly when you didn't belong. And yet, on the top floor, one light was on. A single desk lamp burned inside the CEO's glass-walled office, illuminating a woman who was very aware that she should not be there. Naomi Baker stood perfectly still, one hand resting on the edge of a desk that cost more than her yearly salary. Her cleaning cart was parked haphazardly near the door, mop half forgotten, spray bottle abandoned on the floor like evidence at a crime scene. 3 massive monitors glowed in front of her. Red numbers pulsed across the screens. Not softly, not subtly. Aggressively. Naomi swallowed. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "Breathe. Just breathe." Her heart was pounding so loudly she was convinced the security cameras could hear it. She adjusted the strap of her uniform, flexed her fingers, and stared back at the data like it might blink first. She had been cleaning this floor for 11 months. 11 months of wiping fingerprints off glass tables that never held fingerprints. 11 months of emptying trash cans filled with shredded projections, half-written strategies, and mistakes disguised as confidence. 11 months of being invisible to men who spoke in millions and never once asked her name. And for 3 weeks now, something had been wrong. Every night, the same anomaly. Every night, the same red spike. She had tried to ignore it. She really had. But numbers didn't let you look away. They followed you. They lingered. They whispered. "This doesn't add up." Naomi stepped closer to the desk. "I'm just looking," she murmured. "Looking isn't illegal." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard anyway. The graphs flickered as she tapped a key. A small adjustment, barely noticeable. The kind of change that no one would ever trace back to a cleaning lady with worn sneakers and a name badge nobody read. Her breath caught. "Oh, no," she whispered. No, this is worse. Much worse." The projections didn't just suggest a mistake. They predicted a collapse. A slow bleed that would hit hardest in Q4. Hundreds of millions gone. Not because the market failed, but because the model was lying. Her stomach twisted. "If this holds," she muttered, "Tower Crown is about to implode." She rubbed her temples, mind racing. Seasonal variance ignored. Consumer behavior treated like a straight line. A regression curve stretched past reality because someone assumed people never changed. People always changed. She leaned in, adjusting another variable. That was when the door unlocked. The sound was soft, controlled, final. Naomi froze. She didn't turn around immediately. She didn't breathe. For one absurd second, she thought that if she stayed perfectly still, maybe whoever had entered would assume she was part of the furniture. Then a voice spoke behind her. "Explain." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Naomi gasped and spun around so fast she nearly dropped the keyboard she was clutching. Her foot caught on the edge of the rug, her balance wobbled, and she barely managed to steady herself by grabbing the desk. Standing in the doorway was Johnny Watson, CEO of Tower Crown. 34 years old, impossibly composed, a man who commanded boardrooms without ever raising his voice. His tailored suit jacket was draped over one arm, his tie loosened slightly, as if he'd come back for something he forgot. Or someone. His eyes moved from Naomi to the glowing monitors and back again. Slowly, carefully. You're accessing live financial projections, he said. Naomi's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I was thinking about accessing them, she said, far too quickly, which is probably worse. Silence dropped between them like glass. She waited for the alarm, the call to security, the sharp intake of breath before consequences. It didn't come. Johnny took one step forward, then another. Ruth, his executive assistant, would have already been dialing. Eva from legal would have been calculating liability. Charles from finance would have drafted a termination email before Naomi finished blinking. Johnny Watson did none of that. Explain, he said again. Something inside Naomi snapped, not fear, not panic, but exhaustion. The bone-deep tiredness of pretending she hadn't seen what everyone else had missed. If you don't correct the seasonal variance in this model, she said, words spilling out now, Tower Crown will lose between $400 and $600 million by the end of the year. Your system assumes consumer behavior is static. It isn't. It never is. Johnny's gaze sharpened. He turned to the monitors, studied the lines, the numbers. Then he looked back at her. Mark, the head analyst, had approved these projections. Anthony, the senior strategist, had signed off on them. But the cleaning lady hadn't. You're not just cleaning floors, Johnny said quietly. Naomi straightened, heart racing. No, she replied. I'm cleaning mistakes. The air in the room shifted. He should have fired her. She knew that. He knew that. Instead, Johnny Watson did something that surprised them both. Sit, he said. Naomi blinked. I'm sorry? Sit, he repeated, gesturing to the chair, and show me everything. She hesitated for half a second, then obeyed. For the next 20 minutes, the world narrowed to numbers and logic. Naomi spoke quickly, precisely, pointing out errors, adjusting assumptions, dismantling projections piece by piece. Her nerves faded as focus took over. This was familiar. This made sense. Johnny didn't interrupt. He watched. When she finished, the monitors glowed green. All green. Johnny leaned back slowly, exhaling. You just saved my company, he said. Naomi let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Or committed a crime. Depends how your lawyers feel about it. He didn't smile, but something shifted behind his eyes. What were you hiding? He asked. She met his gaze. I wasn't hiding access, Naomi said softly. I was hiding capability. Silence again. Different this time. Heavy with implication. Somewhere deep in the building, an elevator chimed. Naomi realized her hands were shaking. Johnny straightened, his voice calm once more. You're authorized temporary access, he said. Quietly. She stared at him. You trust me? He paused. I trust results, he said. Then, after a beat, and honesty. Naomi nodded slowly. As she gathered her things, one thought echoed in her mind, louder than any alarm. Her invisible life was over. Whatever came next would either elevate her or destroy her. If this story has you hooked already, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment where you're watching from, because what's about to come next will change everything. Naomi Baker did not sleep that night. She lay on her narrow bed staring at the cracked ceiling of her apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sirens that never quite stopped in her neighborhood. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw numbers, green lines this time, stable and clean, but pulsing with meaning. You just saved my company. The words replayed in her head, heavy and unreal. By 6:30 in the morning, Naomi gave up on sleep. She showered, dressed, and stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, adjusting the collar of her navy cleaning uniform as if it might suddenly transform into something else. It didn't. She still looked like the woman nobody noticed. Tower Crown felt different in daylight. By 8 a.m., the lobby buzzed with controlled chaos, heels clicking against marble, voices layered with urgency, coffee cups balanced like currency. Naomi pushed her cleaning cart through the revolving doors, invisible again the moment she crossed the threshold. Ruth passed her without slowing, phone pressed to her ear. Tell Mark I want revised projections by noon, Ruth said sharply, eyes sliding past Naomi as if she were part of the wall. Eva followed minutes later, scrolling through legal briefs, never once glancing up. Mark walked by with Anthony, laughing about something that sounded expensive. None of them said her name. None of them ever did. Naomi swallowed and kept moving. She cleaned glass conference tables that reflected faces she wasn't allowed to join. She emptied trash cans filled with discarded drafts, ideas that had been wrong before they were printed. She wiped fingerprints from monitors that showed polished presentations hiding messy foundations. And all the while, her mind worked. It always did. Numbers had been Naomi's first language. She remembered the exact moment she realized it, back when she was 19 and sitting in her first applied analytics lecture. The professor had filled the board with equations, warning the class that most of them wouldn't make it past midterms. Naomi had smiled. Patterns had leapt out at her like constellations. While other students memorized formulas, she felt them how one variable bent another, how assumptions warped outcomes if you weren't careful. She had loved it. Until the phone call came. Her mother's voice had been brittle, exhausted. A family crisis that swallowed everything: time, money, options. Naomi had withdrawn the following semester, telling herself it was temporary. Temporary turned into necessity. Cleaning became survival, not ambition. She told herself she was fine with that. But wrong numbers still made her stomach twist. Physically, like an itch she couldn't scratch. By mid-morning, Naomi was wiping down a glass wall outside the executive offices when her cleaning tablet vibrated softly in her pocket. Private message. J. Watson. Her breath caught. She glanced around quickly, then ducked into an empty supply closet and pulled the device out. Conference room C. 10 minutes. No explanation. No emojis. Just facts. Her pulse spiked. Temporary access, she reminded herself. Quietly, Naomi straightened her uniform, tucked her hair behind her ears, and headed for the elevators. Conference room C was small and windowless, used mostly for internal reviews and conversations people didn't want overheard. Johnny Watson was already there when she arrived. He stood by the table, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened again. A laptop sat open in front of him, numbers scrolling across the screen. He looked up the moment she stepped inside. "You came," he said. "You texted," Naomi replied. "That's usually a sign." A flicker, something almost like amusement, crossed his face. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. This time, the word felt less like an order and more like an invitation. She sat. "I reviewed everything you changed last night," Johnny said. 3 times. Naomi winced. And the model holds," he replied, "better than the original." She exhaled slowly. "I authorized temporary access to a sandbox environment," he continued. "Not the live system. You'll be able to test corrections without triggering alerts." Naomi blinked. "You already did that?" "Yes." "Quietly?" "Yes." Something warm and unsettling spread through her chest. "Why?" she asked. Johnny didn't answer immediately. He studied the screen, fingers steepled, as if choosing words the way he chose data. "Because you see things," he said finally. "And because if you're right about the projections, someone else will notice soon." Naomi's shoulders tensed. "Notice how?" "By asking uncomfortable questions," Johnny replied, "the kind that don't always want honest answers." A fragile alliance formed in that moment, not spoken aloud, but understood. For the next half hour they worked side by side. Naomi pointed out inconsistencies she'd noticed while cleaning reports duplicated too cleanly, timestamps that didn't align. Johnny followed her logic with startling speed, asking sharp, precise questions. They didn't talk about anything else. Not about who she was supposed to be. Not about who he was expected to remain. Just numbers. Truth. Consequence. When they finished, Johnny closed the laptop. "Thank you," he said. Naomi hesitated, then nodded. "You're welcome." As she stood to leave, something prickled at the back of her neck. Awareness. She glanced toward the glass wall just as a shadow moved past it. Someone had been standing there, watching. Naomi pushed the thought aside and returned to her cart, forcing herself back into routine. Mop, spray, wipe, breathe. But the feeling didn't leave. By afternoon, whispers followed her down hallways. Not words, looks. Lingering glances. She caught Ruth watching her from across the lobby, brows furrowed. Eva paused mid-step once, eyes narrowing slightly before moving on. "You're not invisible anymore," Naomi thought. That terrified her more than breaking into the CEO's office ever had. At 4:30, Naomi finished cleaning the executive wing and headed toward the restricted stairwell, the one she'd been told to avoid unless explicitly instructed. She hesitated, then stepped through. The door closed softly behind her. She had barely taken 3 steps when someone spoke. "Did you get lost?" Naomi turned. Anthony stood at the end of the corridor, tablet tucked under one arm, expression pleasant and unreadable. Her heart skipped. "No," she said carefully. "I was told to come this way." Anthony's eyes flicked briefly to the stairwell sign, then back to her. "Interesting," he said. "Most people aren't." Naomi forced a small smile. "Guess I'm not most people." Anthony smiled too, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Guess not," he agreed. As he walked past her, Naomi felt the weight of his gaze linger like a hand on her back. And she absolutely knew that someone had finally seen her. If you're feeling the tension rise, don't forget to like this story, subscribe, share it, and comment where you're watching from. Because what's about to come next won't stay quiet for long. Johnny Watson had a reputation. It followed him into boardrooms, into private clubs, into headlines that described him as brilliant, unreadable, surgically precise. A man who turned companies into machines that printed money. A man who never raised his voice because he never had to. Inside Tower Crown, people said the same things with different words. Cold, distant, unapproachable. Johnny knew all of it. He simply didn't know what to do with it. At 11:47 p.m., the executive floor was quiet again. The kind of quiet he preferred. No conversations to navigate. No faces to interpret. Just numbers, honest, obedient numbers. Johnny sat alone in his office, jacket folded neatly over the back of his chair, sleeves rolled up as they had been the night before. 3 monitors glowed in front of him. Green, all green. He leaned back slowly, eyes scanning the projections for the 4th time that night. The model held. Not just mathematically, logically. It breathed where it needed to, bent where reality bent. Elegant, he thought. He hadn't used that word for data in years. Johnny tapped a key and pulled up the version from before. Red spikes flared across the screen like wounds. He swallowed. Most people wouldn't have noticed the difference until the quarterly review. By then, the damage would have been irreversible. Careers ruined quietly. Shareholders appeased with explanations that sounded convincing enough. Except Naomi Baker had noticed. The cleaning lady. The woman who slipped through Tower Crown every night with a mop and a mind sharp enough to dismantle a billion-dollar illusion. Johnny exhaled slowly. He trusted data because data didn't lie to him. People did. People said what they meant to say, not what they meant. They smiled without meaning it. They hid ambition behind loyalty and envy behind praise. Data either worked or it didn't. Naomi worked. Johnny clicked through the audit trail again. Minimal keystrokes. Efficient corrections. No excess movement. No ego. She hadn't played with the system. She had respected it. That, more than anything, fascinated him. He remembered the way she spoke fast, precise, like her thoughts were tripping over each other to get out. The way she'd straighten the moment she realized she was being taken seriously. People didn't do that around him. They performed. Naomi had simply been. At 12:23 a.m., Johnny closed the projections and opened a different file, internal access logs. He frowned. Someone else had been in the system earlier that evening. Not Naomi. The timestamp was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Johnny's jaw tightened. By morning, Tower Crown buzzed with its usual precision, but Johnny felt the shift beneath it. The kind of tension you only noticed if you were already listening. He stepped into the executive meeting room at 9 sharp. Charles was already there. CFO, immaculate suit, smile that never reached his eyes. Morning, Johnny, Charles said smoothly. Late night? Johnny took his seat at the head of the table. Productive. Mark and Anthony followed, taking their places. Ruth stood near the wall, tablet in hand. Charles clasped his hands together. I reviewed the revised projections, he said. Impressive turnaround. Johnny looked at him. You noticed. It would have been hard not to, Charles replied lightly. Such a sudden correction. A pause. Just long enough to mean something. Yes, Johnny said. Sudden. Anthony shifted slightly in his chair. Mark cleared his throat. The numbers are solid, he said. Whoever caught the error did good work. Johnny said nothing. Charles tilted his head. Whoever. Johnny met his gaze evenly. Does it matter? The room went quiet. Charles smiled again, polite as ever. Only in the sense that accountability always matters. Johnny felt the familiar irritation crawl up his spine. He forced it down. Results matter, he said. Everything else is noise. The meeting moved on, but Johnny felt it the subtle resistance. Questions framed as concern. Curiosity sharpened into scrutiny. When it ended, Charles lingered. Careful, he said quietly as the others filed out. Change attracts attention. Johnny looked at him. So does stagnation. Charles's smile thinned. Indeed. That afternoon, Johnny found himself watching the security feed more than the reports. He spotted Naomi twice. Once near the elevators, pushing her cart with her usual focus, eyes forward, posture neutral. Once later, slipping into a side corridor that wasn't part of her assigned route. Johnny didn't stop her. He shouldn't have noticed at all. Instead, he made a note. At 6:10 p.m., Johnny sent her a single message. Server room B, 10 minutes. He didn't know why he trusted her. Only that he did. Naomi arrived exactly on time. She stood just inside the door, hands clasped loosely in front of her, eyes alert. You wanted to see me? She asked. Johnny nodded. I found something. He turned the monitor toward her and pulled up the access logs. Naomi leaned in, studying them. That timestamp doesn't belong, she said almost immediately. Johnny's eyebrows lifted slightly. You saw it. Yes, she replied. It's too clean. Whoever did this wanted it to look routine. Which means it wasn't, Johnny said. Naomi straightened. Someone else is adjusting the system. Yes. Her jaw tightened. And they're not fixing anything. No, Johnny agreed. They're steering it. Silence settled between them, not awkward, not heavy, focused. You trust me with this? Naomi asked. Johnny met her eyes. I trust what you see. Something flickered across her face, surprise, then resolve. Then you should know, she said, lowering her voice. I've noticed duplicates in archived reports. Weeks apart, identical numbers. Johnny felt a chill. That shouldn't happen, he said. It doesn't, Naomi replied. Unless someone wants it to. Johnny nodded slowly. In that moment, without ceremony or announcement, Naomi Baker became something else entirely. Not an employee. An asset. His unspoken secret weapon. That night, Johnny stayed late again. He reviewed everything Naomi had flagged, cross-referencing reports, tracing patterns that now seemed painfully obvious. He didn't sleep. At 2:04 a.m., he leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pressing in from all sides. Naomi had saved Tower Crown quietly, silently, without credit. And now someone was trying to undo that. Johnny stared at the city lights through the glass wall and felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Responsibility, yes. But also something else. Protectiveness. 3 floors below, Charles sat alone in his office, jacket off, sleeves pristine. He stared at his own screen, brows knitting together. Access logs. Recent changes. Subtle corrections that didn't align with the workflow. His fingers stilled. Someone had touched the system, and it hadn't been him. Charles leaned back slowly, lips curling into something sharp. Well, he murmured, that's interesting. He closed the file, already recalculating. Above him, Johnny Watson stood at the glass, unaware that the quiet war had officially begun. If you feel the tension tightening, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment where you're watching from because the game has just changed. Naomi Baker began to feel it in her shoulders first. A tightness. A subtle weight that hadn't been there before. By Wednesday morning, Tower Crown no longer felt like a building she cleaned. It felt like a place that watched her back. She noticed it in the smallest ways. A spreadsheet left open on a printer that shouldn't have been printing. A report she'd seen last week reappearing in the recycle bin unchanged. Timestamps that lagged by minutes when they should have been instantaneous. Duplicated reports. Perfect duplicates. Naomi stood in the copy room, holding two identical financial summaries in her hands, pulse ticking in her ears. Same figures. Same formatting. Same errors. Weeks apart. That didn't happen by accident. She slipped the papers back where she'd found them and continued down the hallway, pushing her cart as if nothing had changed. But her mind was already racing, assembling fragments into something ugly. Someone is copying results instead of producing them. And worse. Someone wants the copies to pass. She spent the next hour cleaning the executive wing with a carefulness that bordered on disguise. Spray. Wipe. Move. Listen. Voices drifted through glass walls. Did you hear? Not her place. CEO's office, apparently. Naomi paused just long enough to catch her reflection in the glass. Uniform neat, face neutral, eyes too alert. She wasn't invisible anymore. Ruth stood near the elevators with Eva, their voices low. I'm telling you, Ruth murmured, glancing down the hall. She's been in restricted areas. Eva frowned. Facilities has clearance. Not that clearance, Ruth replied, and Johnny doesn't make exceptions. Naomi pushed her cart past them, pretending not to hear. The conversation stopped. She felt it, the sudden quiet that followed her like a shadow. By noon, Naomi's hands were shaking. She retreated to the supply room, leaned against the metal shelving, and closed her eyes. Breathe. Wrong numbers always made her uncomfortable. These made her feel hunted. Her tablet vibrated. Private message. J. Watson. Meet me, now. She didn't ask where. She already knew. Johnny Watson didn't look up when Naomi entered his office. He stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back. City stretched beneath him like a grid he couldn't quite solve. Close the door, he said. She did. Johnny turned, his expression unreadable. You were right, he said. Naomi's stomach dropped. About what? This isn't incompetence, Johnny continued. It's deliberate. She exhaled slowly. Sabotage. Yes. He crossed the room and pulled up a display on his tablet, projecting it onto the wall. Duplicated reports. Delayed updates. Metadata that didn't align. Naomi stepped closer, eyes scanning. They're spacing the errors, she said, so no single quarter looks catastrophic. But together? Johnny asked. They add up, Naomi replied. Quietly. Johnny nodded. Enough to justify intervention. Naomi's throat tightened. Intervention by who? Johnny didn't answer immediately. Instead, he said, the access trail leads upward. Her heart pounded. How far? Johnny met her gaze. Toward Charles. The name landed like a dropped plate. Naomi shook her head. That doesn't make sense. He's the CFO. He's also the gatekeeper, Johnny said. Every projection passes through him. Silence stretched. Naomi swallowed. If that's true, then this company isn't just at risk, Johnny finished. It's being positioned. She wrapped her arms around herself without realizing it. For what? Johnny's voice lowered. A failure someone else can step in to fix. A chill crept down her spine. So what do we do? She asked. Johnny hesitated. And in that hesitation, Naomi saw something she hadn't before. Uncertainty. We move carefully, he said, and quietly. She nodded. People are watching. Yes, Johnny agreed. They noticed you. Her mouth tightened. I didn't ask for that. I know, he said. He paused, then added softly, if this is real, people will lie. Naomi met his eyes. I'm good at patterns, she said. Not politics. Johnny's lips curved faintly. Then we'll rely on patterns. Anthony noticed everything. He noticed Naomi's altered routes. He noticed Johnny's closed-door meetings. He noticed the way the cleaning staff tablet logs didn't quite match her assigned tasks. He said nothing. Instead, he took notes. By late afternoon, Anthony was in Charles's office, standing just far enough away to appear respectful. She's been accessing restricted corridors, Anthony said casually. The cleaning woman. Charles didn't look up from his screen. Which one? Anthony smiled. Exactly. Charles's fingers paused. Johnny authorized it, Anthony added, quietly. Now Charles looked up. Did he said. Anthony shrugged. Just thought you should know. Charles studied him for a long moment, then nodded. You did the right thing. Anthony left with a sense of satisfaction he didn't bother to hide. Naomi stayed late that night. Later than usual. The building emptied slowly, executives filtering out, lights dimming floor by floor. By 10, Tower Crown returned to its after-hours hush. Naomi moved through the executive wing with a purpose she couldn't quite name. She told herself she was cleaning. She told herself she was finishing her route. But her eyes kept drifting to one office. Charles's. She stood outside it for a full minute, mop resting against the wall. Not your job, she told herself. She reached for the handle anyway. The office smelled like leather and expensive cologne. The desk was immaculate, too immaculate. No loose papers, no clutter. Naomi frowned. That wasn't how people worked. She moved slowly, carefully, scanning surfaces as she wiped. Her gaze caught on something under the desk. A corner of blue. She crouched, heart hammering, and pulled it free. A folder. Plain, heavy, labeled in bold black letters. Confidential Q4 realignment. Naomi's breath hitched. She stared at the folder like it might explode. This wasn't trash. This wasn't a mistake. This was intent. Her fingers trembled as she slid it into her cart beneath a stack of cleaning cloths. She straightened, pulse roaring in her ears. Don't open it, she told herself. Not here. She pushed the cart toward the door, every sound magnified, every shadow suspect. As she stepped into the hallway, she didn't see Anthony watching from the far end. She only felt it, the certainty that the line had been crossed. Tower Crown wasn't just being watched anymore. It was being set up. If the tension is hitting you now, don't forget to like this story, subscribe, share it, and comment where you're watching from, because what Naomi just found will change everything. Naomi Baker did not open the folder that night. She carried it home like contraband, tucked beneath her jacket, every step from Tower Crown to the bus stop feeling louder than it should have. The city moved around, her cars passing, people laughing, life continuing, but her awareness narrowed until everything revolved around the weight pressed against her ribs. Confidential Q4 realignment. She replayed the moment she'd found it under Charles's desk again and again. The way it hadn't been hidden, exactly just placed where no one would ever think to look. Because no one ever thought to look like she did. At home, Naomi locked the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing hard. Her apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in as if they, too, knew what she was holding. Not here, she told herself again. She set the folder on the kitchen table and walked away, pacing the length of the room. Every instinct she had screamed at her to open it. To know. To confirm the pattern her mind had already completed. But knowledge was dangerous. Knowledge changed things. And once she crossed that line, there would be no pretending she was just the cleaning lady anymore. Naomi poured herself a glass of water she didn't drink, stood at the sink staring at the wall, then finally turned back. Her hands were steady when she opened the folder. Inside were documents arranged with meticulous care. Too meticulous. Altered projections sat on top versions of reports she recognized instantly. Numbers she had corrected, quietly reworked to reintroduce the very errors she'd removed. Adjustments disguised as refinements. Losses delayed, not eliminated. Naomi flipped to the next section. Emails. Her stomach dropped. external investors, private equity groups, language wrapped in concern and opportunity. If leadership instability continues, should the board require intervention, we are prepared to assist with restructuring. Naomi's pulse roared in her ears. She turned the page. More communications, older ones, months back. A timeline began to emerge. Not chaos. A plan. Evidence of a gradual undermining small enough not to alarm, consistent enough to accumulate. A failure designed to look organic. And at the center of it all, Johnny Watson. Not named directly. Never directly. But implied. Repeatedly. If current leadership cannot maintain confidence, should projections fail under existing oversight? Naomi sank into the chair, breath shallow. This isn't about the company, she whispered. This was about replacing the man at the top. Her phone buzzed. She nearly jumped out of her skin. Johnny. Did you take anything from Charles's office? Naomi stared at the screen, then typed back. Naomi, yes. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Johnny, where are you? Johnny arrived 20 minutes later. He didn't sit. He stood at the edge of Naomi's kitchen, jacket still on, eyes fixed on the folder spread across the table. You should have waited, he said quietly. Naomi looked up at him. I know. He exhaled slowly. Show me. She slid the documents toward him. Johnny read in silence, jaw tightening with each page. The longer he looked, the more controlled he became, which Naomi was beginning to recognize as a warning sign. When he finished, he didn't speak for a long moment. They've been preparing this for months, he said finally. Naomi nodded. Before I ever touched the system. Yes. He closed the folder carefully, like it might bite. This isn't incompetence, he said again. It's a takeover. Naomi hugged her arms around herself. And you're the obstacle. Johnny met her gaze. Yes. The word landed heavy between them. I didn't sign up for this, Naomi said suddenly. Her voice shook despite her effort to keep it steady. I clean floors. I notice patterns. I don't dismantle executive conspiracies. Johnny's expression softened just slightly. I know, he said. You shouldn't have to. She laughed once, sharp and humorless. But I already do. Silence settled. Naomi stared at the table. I don't belong in your world. Johnny frowned. That's not. I don't, she insisted. Every step I take past where I'm supposed to be feels like trespassing. People are watching me, whispering. I don't have a safety net, Johnny. If this blows up, I don't land softly. Johnny's hands curled into fists at his sides. I do, he said quietly. She looked up. I land just fine, he continued. That's the difference. The admission surprised her. So why involve me? She asked. Why not handle this yourself? Johnny hesitated. And in that hesitation, Naomi saw the crack. Because I can't, he said. The words came out flat, factual, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. Because everything I touch becomes political, he continued. Every question I ask is assumed to be self-serving. Every move is anticipated. And because whoever is doing this already knows how I think. He gestured toward the folder. They didn't account for you. Naomi swallowed. You need me, she said. Yes, Johnny replied. No pause, no hesitation. I do. Something shifted between them, not intimacy, not romance, but trust stripped of illusion. Naomi leaned back, exhaustion pressing in from all sides. If we do this, she said slowly, we do it quietly. Johnny nodded. Agreed. No confrontation, she added. Not yet. Yes. We gather proof, Naomi said, independently, enough that no one can spin it. Johnny met her eyes. I'll shield you where I can. She almost smiled. Almost. They worked late into the night, outlining a plan that relied on Naomi's invisibility and Johnny's access. Separate trails. Redundancy. Time. At 2:37 a.m., Johnny closed his notebook. There's one more thing, he said. What? Naomi asked. Charles scheduled an emergency board meeting, Johnny replied. For Friday. Naomi's stomach dropped. That's 2 days away. Yes. And the timing? Johnny's expression hardened. Perfect. They looked at each other, the unspoken reality settling in. The clock had started. If you're feeling the pressure rise, don't forget to like this story, subscribe, share it, and comment where you're watching from because what happens next will decide everything. The first thing Johnny Watson noticed Thursday morning was silence. Not the comfortable, deliberate quiet he preferred, but the wrong kind. The kind that followed him. Meetings ended early when he entered. Conversations shifted mid-sentence. Eyes flicked away from screens too quickly. By 9:12 a.m., he knew. Something had moved without him. He sat at his desk and logged into the financial dashboard. Access denied. Johnny blinked once. He tried again. Same message. His jaw tightened. Across the building, Naomi Baker felt it at almost the same moment. Her tablet refused to load her assigned routes. A spinning icon replaced the floor plan she'd memorized by heart. She frowned, tapped the screen, then looked up as Ruth approached slowly, carefully, like someone stepping into a room they weren't sure they belonged in. Hey, Ruth said. Facilities asked HR to review some access protocols. Naomi's pulse spiked. Review? Routine. Ruth replied too quickly. Probably nothing. Probably. Naomi nodded, thanked her, and pushed her cart forward, but the building no longer felt navigable. Doors that once opened automatically hesitated. Corridors she'd moved through freely now required badge scans that lingered half a second too long. Someone had tightened the net. I clean there. Yes, Susan agreed, but you've been seen in areas outside your usual route. Naomi met her gaze evenly. Sometimes spills happen. Susan nodded. Of course. And you've interacted with senior leadership. Naomi didn't respond. Susan smiled again. Just want to make sure everything's appropriate. Naomi stood. Am I being accused of something? No, Susan said quickly, not at all. Then I'll get back to work, Naomi replied. She left without waiting for permission. Her hands didn't stop shaking until she reached the stairwell. Eva watched from across the floor, eyes narrowed. Ruth stood beside her, conflicted. This doesn't feel right, Ruth murmured. Eva crossed her arms. Nothing about this feels right. By afternoon, Johnny and Naomi hadn't spoken once. Not because they didn't want to, because they couldn't. Emails bounced, messages delayed, surveillance tightened. They finally met in the only place left unmonitored, the stairwell between floors 11 and 12. Johnny arrived first, loosening his tie, tension etched into every line of his posture. Naomi followed minutes later, breathless, eyes sharp. They're isolating us, she said quietly. Johnny nodded. Me from authority, you from access. They questioned me, Naomi added. His jaw clenched. Are you okay? She hesitated. I don't know yet. Silence pressed in around them, broken only by the hum of distant ventilation. If this goes wrong, Naomi said suddenly, they'll crush me. Johnny looked at her, really looked. I won't let that happen. She laughed softly. You might not get a choice. The truth of it hung between them. For the first time since they'd met, Johnny stepped closer, not into her space, but close enough that she felt the heat of him. I should never have pulled you into this, he said. Naomi shook her head. You didn't. I walked in. No longer uncertain. Resolved. If I'm going down, she whispered to herself, I'm going down fighting. If you can feel the walls closing in, don't forget to like this story, subscribe, share it, and comment where you're watching from because the next move will change everything. The boardroom at Tower Crown had never felt so small. Johnny Watson sat at the head of the table, spine straight, expression unreadable. 12 board members filled the room, faces polished, neutral, expectant. The kind of people who smiled without warmth and listened without revealing what they were already deciding. At exactly 9 a.m., Charles cleared his throat. Thank you all for convening on such short notice, he said smoothly. I wish this meeting were unnecessary. Johnny didn't look at him. Charles continued anyway. Over the past quarter, we've seen alarming inconsistencies in Tower Crown's financial projections, Charles said, tapping his tablet. Losses that were temporarily masked. Corrections made without transparency. Systems accessed without proper oversight. A murmur rippled through the room. Johnny's jaw tightened. Charles turned toward him. This reflects a breakdown in leadership. Johnny finally spoke. Be careful. Charles smiled. I'm being precise. He gestured, and the screens lit up graphs, timelines, reports stripped of context and presented as chaos. Under Mr. Watson's leadership, Charles said calmly, financial controls were compromised, senior teams bypassed, risk ignored. One board, hair pulled back. A backpack slung over one shoulder. Breathing hard. For one stunned second, no one spoke. Then someone laughed. Is this a joke? A board member said. Ruth gasped quietly from the corner. Eva's eyes widened. Charles froze. Johnny's heart slammed against his ribs. Naomi stepped forward. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said clearly, but you're being lied to. The room erupted. Who is this? Security. She's staff. Naomi didn't stop. I cleaned this building, she continued, and I saved it. Silence fell sharp, brittle. Charles recovered first. This meeting is confidential, he said. You are wildly out of place. Naomi met his gaze. No, I'm right on time. She reached into her bag and placed a thick stack of documents on the table. Johnny stood. Let her speak. The board hesitated. Then the chairwoman nodded once. 5 minutes. Charles's smile twitched. Naomi exhaled slowly. Let's start with metadata, she said. She tapped a tablet and projected her screen. Every report Mr. Clark referenced today was altered after initial submission, Naomi said, not by analysts, not by automated systems. She zoomed in. Timestamps flickered. By one access point, she continued. A CFO-level override. Murmurs again. Charles scoffed. This is absurd. Cleaning staff cannot. Naomi didn't look at him. Next, she said, timelines. She pulled up a layered chart. These errors were introduced gradually, too small to trigger alarms individually. But together? She highlighted a cumulative loss projection, enough to justify an emergency restructuring. A board member stiffened. That's deliberate. Yes, Naomi said. Sabotage. Charles stood abruptly. This is outrageous. And motivated, Naomi added, chairwoman ordered. Anthony sat. The board stared at Charles. This meeting is adjourned, the chairwoman said coldly. Mr. Clark, you will step down effective immediately. Pending investigation. Charles's face drained of color. This is a mistake, he said quietly. No, Naomi replied. It's math. Security appeared at the door. Charles left without another word. Anthony followed, shaking. Silence lingered. Then, Miss Baker, the chairwoman said, would you accept a formal role with Tower Crown? Naomi blinked. Johnny looked at her. Data analyst, the chairwoman continued. Effective immediately. Naomi swallowed. Yes. The meeting dissolved. As the room emptied, Johnny remained standing. Naomi turned toward him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Johnny smiled, not polite, not controlled. Oh. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. If that power shift just gave you chills, don't forget to like this story, subscribe, share it, and comment where you're watching from because the story isn't over yet. The building felt different after the board meeting. Not louder. Not quieter. Just altered. People moved with new caution, new awareness. Doors opened faster for Naomi now. Eyes lingered longer, not dismissive anymore, but curious, respectful, unsure. She didn't know how to feel about it. By late afternoon, the executive floor had thinned out, tension slowly draining from the glass walls and polished tables. Naomi stood alone in what was now her office, small, temporary, barely furnished, and stared at the window without seeing the city beyond it. She had won. Tower Crown was safe. Johnny was still CEO, Charles was gone. And yet, something inside her felt unfinished. Her phone buzzed. Johnny, rooftop, before sunset. She hesitated, then grabbed her jacket. Johnny Watson stood near the edge of the rooftop, hands resting lightly on the railing, watching the sun lower itself between buildings like a controlled descent. The city glowed gold. He heard Naomi before he saw her, not her footsteps, but the subtle shift in the air when she arrived. He turned. She stopped a few feet away. "Congratulations," she said softly. He shook his head. "That feels inaccurate." She studied him, the loosened tie, the exhaustion in his eyes, the absence of armor. "You saved your company," she said. He looked at her. "You did." Silence settled, not heavy, not awkward, just real. "I don't know how to say this properly," Johnny admitted. Naomi crossed her arms. "You don't have to calculate it." He almost smiled. "That's the problem," he said. "I only know how to calculate." She waited. Johnny took a breath, steadying himself. "I've said thank you dozens of times today," he continued. "To board members, to legal, to investors." He paused. "And none of it feels sufficient." Naomi's chest tightened. "So say what you mean," she said. Johnny nodded slowly, as if accepting a difficult equation. "I've spent my life understanding systems," he said, "predicting outcomes, minimizing variables." She listened, unmoving. "And then you walked into my office at 2:11 a.m., he continued, "and corrected something my entire structure failed to see." "That was numbers," Naomi said gently. "No," Johnny replied. "That was you." She inhaled sharply. "You disrupted my order," he said. "Not just professionally." He hesitated, fingers tightening on the railing. "I don't connect easily," he admitted. "I don't register people the way others do. But you," he looked at her fully now, "you became a constant." Naomi swallowed. "Johnny, I ran the probabilities," he said quietly, "of what happens when you leave." She blinked. "You did what?" "The data is unhelpful," he continued. "My productivity drops, my focus fragments, the system becomes inefficient." She stared at him. "You're confessing feelings with metrics." "Yes," he said, "and I realize that may be inadequate." She laughed soft, surprised, not unkind. "Johnny," she said, stepping closer, "you can't spreadsheet your way into intimacy." He winced slightly. "I suspected as much." She stood beside him now, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I'm saying," he said carefully, "that I don't want to return to equilibrium." Her heart skipped. "I want to choose something unpredictable." The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of amber and rose. Naomi looked out at the city, then back at him. "You don't choose people like projects," she said. "You don't optimize them." "I know," Johnny replied. "I'm trying not to." She softened. "Good," she said. "Because I don't want to be figured out." He nodded. "I don't want to figure you out." Their eyes held. Not urgent. Not dramatic. Honest. "So," Naomi said quietly, "what happens now?" Johnny considered the question with the seriousness he gave everything. "We proceed without guarantees," he said, "without leverage." She smiled faintly. "That sounds terrifying." "Yes," he agreed. "But acceptable." The wind lifted slightly, brushing Naomi's hair across her cheek. Johnny resisted the instinct to move, then remembered this wasn't a system. He reached out. Stopped. "May I?" he asked. Naomi nodded. His hand found hers careful, uncertain. Their fingers fit awkwardly at first, then adjusted. It wasn't perfect. It was real. She squeezed his hand. "You're allowed to be human," she said. Johnny exhaled, something unclenching inside him. "I'm learning," he replied. They stood there as the sun slipped fully behind the skyline, the city lights blinking on one by one below them. Johnny turned toward her, hesitating only a second. "This is the part," he said, "where people usually Kiss? Naomi offered. Yes, he said. Statistically. She smiled. Then stop thinking, she said. He leaned in. It wasn't smooth. Their noses bumped slightly. He paused, unsure. She laughed under her breath and closed the distance herself. The kiss was just. No uniform, no cart. Just her. She paused in the lobby for a moment, grounding herself. The marble floor reflected her back sharper, steadier, but unmistakably the same woman who used to move through this space unnoticed. Ruth spotted her first. Oh, Ruth said, then smiled. Hi. Hi, Naomi replied. There was a beat of uncertainty. Congrats, Ruth added. You earned it. Naomi nodded. Thanks. Eva passed by a moment later, pausing just long enough to say, Good work. It wasn't warmth. But it wasn't dismissal either. That felt like progress. Johnny watched from his office as Naomi crossed the floor toward the analytics wing. Not as her boss. Not as her protector. Just watching. The company was stabilizing. Legal had moved fast. Charles's name no longer appeared on internal correspondence. Anthony had resigned quietly. Tower Crown breathed easier. Johnny felt something close to relief. But it was different now, less about numbers, more about presence. Naomi knocked once before stepping inside his office later that afternoon. Do you have a minute? She asked. Yes. Johnny replied immediately, closing his laptop. She smiled at that. I'm still learning the systems, she said. Your systems. He corrected gently. Our systems. She held his gaze, something unspoken settling between them. Right, she said. Ours. Johnny learned very quickly that Naomi did not exist in the world the way he did. She ate lunch away from her desk. She didn't schedule her evenings in 15-minute blocks. She didn't treat silence like a problem to solve. On Friday, she found him staring at a menu on his phone for a full minute. You're overthinking, she said. I'm choosing, Johnny replied. You're analyzing, she corrected. There's a difference. He frowned. What's your recommendation? Tacos, Naomi said. He blinked. That's not on the list you sent. She grinned. Exactly. They met after work outside a small food truck near the river. No reservations. No dress code. Just string lights, folding chairs, and the smell of grilled onions in the air. Johnny stood awkwardly beside her, scanning the menu. This seems informal, he said. That's the point, Naomi replied. He ordered exactly what she ordered. She rolled her eyes. You don't have to copy me. I prefer controlled variables, he said. She laughed. They sat on the curb, knees brushing. This is better than rooftop sunsets, Naomi said after a while. Johnny considered this. Statistically? No, she said, emotionally. He nodded. Then, I accept the data. They ate in companionable silence, watching the water reflect city lights. No hierarchy. Johnny let her be. That, too, was a kind of love. They didn't rush. They didn't announce. They simply chose. Late one evening, Naomi found herself back on the executive floor. Not cleaning. Just standing. Johnny joined her at the glass wall. Do you miss it? He asked. She thought for a moment. No, she said. But I don't regret it. He nodded. Neither do I. The city hummed below. Life moved forward. After midnight, everything felt possible again. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, and comment where you're watching from. Your support keeps stories like this alive. The end.